My name is Carrie, and I was 4 years old when my life changed forever. That's when my sister Emily was born, and suddenly I was invisible in my own house. My earliest memories are filled with the sounds of Emily singing, melodious, mesmerizing, as if she was born with a voice that was meant to conquer the stage. By the time she was 3 years old, she had already become the star of every family gathering, and while Grandma and Grandpa wiped away tears of emotion, and neighbors volunteered to give her free music lessons, I stood in the corner with plates of snacks that I helped my mother cook, hoping that at least someone would remember about me, but it wasn't happening. Emily had such an angelic voice that made everyone stop and listen, and the more people admired her, the more I felt that I was disappearing into the shadow of her talent, becoming part of the interior, a background that did not deserve attention. My parents, Tom and Linda, were convinced that she would become the next Mariah Carey, and all their time, energy, and even dreams focused on her, leaving me with only duties that I performed meekly, because I knew that otherwise they would simply not hear me. "Carrie, go help your sister practice scales," Mom said, not even looking up from her phone, on which she was recording another video of Emily's performance, and then, without changing her intonation, she added, "And first make sure you've washed the dishes." I was 8 at the time, and Emily was 4, and while she was spinning around the living room in her pink tutu, catching the admiring glances of her parents, I was learning how to use the washing machine because Mom was too busy coordinating her singing lessons. It seemed that the whole life of the family revolved around her, as if around the sun, and if I dared to ask for even a crumb of this attention, I was met only with irritation, as if I was doing something inappropriate, selfish. "Why can't I go to Sarah's birthday party?" I asked one Saturday morning when I was 12, naively believing that if I said this in advance, if I reminded my mother of the agreement, she would understand and let me go, but instead she rolled her eyes as if I was saying something incredibly stupid. "Because Emily has a performance at the community center today, and we need your help changing," she replied in a tired voice, as if she was bored with this conversation before it even started. "But I promised Sarah." "Don't be selfish, Carrie," Dad interjected, looking at me sternly over the top of his glasses. "Your sister needs you. She has a real talent, unlike—" He broke off, but I knew what he meant. "Unlike me." I remember the day when everything changed. Emily was 11 and I was 15, and while she and her friends went to the mall unattended, a privilege I was never allowed at her age, I was mopping the bathroom floors and loading the washing machine, not even suspecting that this trip would turn into something more than just childish pranks. They spent hours at the ice cream parlor, ordering every possible treat and competing to see who could eat the most, but the next morning Emily woke up with a sore throat that rapidly turned into serious inflammation, so severe that doctors with worried faces said that her vocal cords were damaged, and perhaps she won't be able to sing like she used to. I was in the kitchen, immersed in my homework, when they returned from the hospital, and the first thing I heard was Mom's furious voice. "It's your fault." Her eyes were flashing, and her lips were trembling with anger. "You're her older sister, you were supposed to keep an eye on her." "But I did the laundry and cleaned, just like you told me to." "No excuses." Dad's voice was so loud that I jumped, and he slammed his hand down on the table. "You're under house arrest for a month. No phone, no TV, nothing. Maybe it will teach you to take responsibility." That night, lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I made a promise to myself. One day I would build a life in which I would not have to live in anyone's shadow. I just needed to survive a few more years in this house, where I was nothing more than a servant and a scapegoat, blaming myself even for other people's mistakes. The next 3 years flew by in a fog of household chores, endless reproaches and quiet indignation. Every time Emily got into trouble, skipping classes, taking her mom's credit card without asking, or throwing phones at the wall in hysterics, somehow, miraculously, it all came down to the fact that it was my fault. The acceptance letter from the state college was on the kitchen table between us, next to my mother's meatloaf, which, as always, exuded a thick spicy aroma, permeating the air with a mixture of spices and tomato sauce, But this time I hardly felt the smell. My thoughts were completely occupied with something else. I deliberately chose the time for dinner, knowing that my parents would not be able to easily avoid the conversation at the table, would not find excuses to postpone the discussion for later, hide behind the phone screen, or urgently recall some business. They should have listened to me. This is the most affordable option, I said, trying to sound calm and confident, but a familiar wave of despair was already rising in my chest, which required great efforts not to break through. The tuition is reasonable. We don't have any money, but… Carrie, Dad didn't even look up from his plate, as if everything I said in advance didn't matter. Emily giggled from her seat, carefully slicing a small piece of meat with a knife before casually tossing it. Maybe you should have developed some real talents instead of just doing household chores all day. I ignored her taunt, focusing on my parents. You could take a loan for me. I tried to sound like it wasn't a request, but a logical decision that should have seemed as reasonable to them as it did to me. I will write a receipt. I promise to return every penny as soon as I finish my studies and get a job. Please, this is important to me. Mom sighed, a measured, practiced sigh that over the years had acquired a touch of condescending regret, almost contempt, in her performance. Darling, she said in a soft but no less caustic voice, we won't take out loans. College is not for everyone. Why don't you look for a job at the mall or maybe at that new cafe in the city center? I clenched my hands into fists under the table, trying to control the bitterness that came over me. But I have a scholarship that covers part of the tuition fees. I just need help with the rest. I've studied everything, made a budget. Dad's fork hit his plate with a thud, and for the first time in the entire conversation, he raised his head. We said no loans. End of discussion. He looked at me like this conversation was a waste of time. Some people are cut out for college, he added, looking away. Others don't. Accept it and move on. I stared at my untouched dinner, feeling my cheeks burn. Through my tear-blurred vision, I saw Emily's grin. She was enjoying this moment, as she always did when I was losing. That night, lying in the dark, clutching the letter from college in my hands, I felt as if everything I was going to crumble to dust. I didn't know what to do. I did everything I could. I studied perfectly. I tried. I counted every dollar, and all I got in return was indifference. I called my best friend Rachel. We had been close since middle school, drawn together by our shared love of math and the fact that we both felt like outsiders, I because of my family, and she because her parents, Korean immigrants, owned the Golden Dragon restaurant in the city center, and she had to work there after at school, when her peers were relaxing or walking. They won't help, I sobbed into the phone. They are not even considering this option. All these years of excellent grades, efforts, everything was in vain. They just don't care. Rachel was silent for a while, and then she said firmly, "Come back tomorrow. My parents want to talk to you." The next evening, when the restaurant closed, I was sitting in the small Golden Dragon office with Rachel and her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Kim. They had known me for many years, watched me grow up, watched me do my homework for hours at a corner table, running away from the chaos at home. "We've been watching you, Carrie," Mrs. Kim said, her voice warm and enveloping. "You're like a second daughter to us." Rachel told us everything, Mr. Kim nodded. I opened my mouth to protest, but he held up his hand, stopping me. "You will work here part-time after classes. Good salary, flexible schedule. You will slowly return the money to us, no interest. It's not charity, it's an investment in your future." I couldn't speak. Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time not from pain or disappointment, but from something else, from the warmth that I had never experienced in my own home. A few weeks later, I moved into my dorm room at the state college. My parents barely noticed me packing. They were too busy. Emily's important concert was ahead, their last attempt to find her a new talent that could replace her lost singing voice. And I studied during the day and worked in the evenings at Golden Dragon, starting with the simplest duties, serving tables, cleaning, but gradually moving on to inventory management, scheduling staff. I quickly got used to it, feeling that for the first time in my life, what I was doing mattered. The call came on a typical day in my sophomore year, when I was sitting in the library surrounded by stacks of textbooks and notes, once again trying to figure out the complex formulas filling the pages of my notebook. The phone lying next to me suddenly vibrated, and a name that I hadn't expected to see appeared on the screen. Mom's number. My heart skipped a beat, and then began to beat sharply, thudding in my chest. We hadn't spoken for months, not since I'd finally moved out of the house, and in all that time, neither she nor my father had tried to find out how I was coping, or asked if I needed help. I just stared at the screen for a while before taking a deep breath and pressing the answer button. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice distracted, as if the call was just part of something more important, in the background. Muffled sounds could be heard on the phone. Emily was probably practicing something new again, perhaps studying piano or taking vocal lessons, hoping to regain her former voice. "I was just checking on what you were doing," Mom continued in a light, casual tone, as if there had never been an icy estrangement between us, as if she hadn't ignored me for so many months. "I'm in college," I replied dryly, expecting questions about money, how I was coping without their help, and whether I was really going to finish my education, but instead my mother just said vaguely, "Oh, how sweet." And then, without even pausing, she added, "Emily gets only A's in advanced courses." We are so proud that she is finally finding herself, especially after everything that happened to her voice. She did not ask how I pay for my studies, how I managed to combine classes and work, not a word about whether it was difficult for me. They didn't care, and this realization, although it wasn't unexpected, still hurt inside. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun. Mom just said goodbye and hung up, and I remained sitting in the same library, feeling the emptiness inside me grow even deeper. During college, I only came home for big holidays, and every time everything went according to the same scenario, relatives gathered at the long dining table, the table was full of dishes, and Emily sat in the spotlight like a prom queen, talking about her achievements, while her parents beamed with pride, as if everything she did was the fulfillment of their dreams. As always, I was standing in the kitchen, helping with the dishes, listening from another room to endless conversations about her successes, how talented she was and how brilliant her future would be. But Thanksgiving in the third year turned out to be different. I was standing at the kitchen table, as usual, putting a sweet potato casserole into a ceramic mold, when Aunt Susan, after taking a sip of wine, suddenly asked, "Well, what are Emily's plans for college?" Mom proudly straightened up, put down her napkin and, looking around the audience with a satisfied smile, solemnly announced, "We have been saving money for the education of our little star for years. We have enough set aside for her to go wherever she wants." My breath caught in my throat. I froze, and it wasn't until the hot ceramics began to burn my hands through the potholders that I realized I'd almost dropped the dish. 2 years ago, when I begged them for help, they said we had no money. They kept telling me that I had to accept reality and move on. They refused to take out even a small loan to support me, but they'd been saving up for Emily all this time. That night, curled up in my old room, covered with a baby blanket that had once brought me comfort, I dialed Rachel's number. My voice trembled as I whispered, "They have money. They just don't think I'm worth spending it on." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then my friend's confident voice rang out, "Prove them wrong. Although not. You've already done that." She was right. I threw myself back into my studies, spending my days in classrooms and my nights working at Golden Dragon, learning not only the intricacies of the restaurant business, but also the basics of financial management, logistics, and strategic planning. I stopped being just a waitress a long time ago. I became a part of this business, learning from Mr. Kim everything that he could impart to me. By the time I graduated, I had not only returned every cent to the Kims, but also gained invaluable experience in running a successful business. I went from a simple lounge worker to an assistant manager, learned how to coordinate staff work, monitor supplies, optimize costs, and even introduced a new accounting system that increased the efficiency of the restaurant by 30%. On my last day of work, Mr. Kim invited me into his office, and as soon as I closed the door behind me, he handed me a business card, placing it on the table. "I have a friend at Morgan & Chase Corporate," he said, looking at me intently. "They need someone smart, hardworking. Someone like you." I told him how you've transformed our inventory system and improved our work efficiency, and he was very interested. I stared at the card, unable to immediately believe his words. A week after graduation, I walked into my new office at Morgan & Chase, dressed in an elegant suit that I bought with my own hard-earned money. The nameplate on my desk said, "Caroline Mitchell, Junior Analyst." I remember the first time I ran my fingers over the smooth metal surface, how I looked at the engraved letters for a long time, realizing that this was not just a piece of office decor, but a symbol of everything I had achieved on my own, without anyone's help. I led my own team for 6 months, and by the end of the first year, I had received 2 promotions, which allowed me to manage projects that attracted the attention of senior management. I had to work tirelessly, leaving myself no room for mistakes, but I persevered with each task, proving that I was capable of more. I didn't just run errands, I offered ideas, optimized processes, and found innovative solutions, and it didn't go unnoticed. Christmas had come again, and for the first time in many years I felt free from family obligations, but something inside told me that I should go anyway, even if this visit was the same as the previous ones. Mom would be busy in the kitchen, Emily would be the center of attention, relatives would overwhelm her with questions about the future, and I will remain on the periphery, fulfilling the usual role of a silent observer. However, when I pulled into the driveway, I was immediately alerted that the house was dark, except for the dim light in the living room window. There were no cars on the street, although usually by this time the entrance was filled with relatives' cars, and festive lights would already be shining around the perimeter of the house. But now there are no usual intricate decorations, no shimmering wreath on the door, just winter silence and a barely noticeable trace of recent snow on the porch. When the door opened, my mother appeared in front of me, in an old, elongated sweater, without makeup, with a tired expression on her face. "Emily's not coming?" I asked, walking into the house, where I was immediately struck by the strange silence and the absence of the familiar smell of her traditional Christmas roast. "She's celebrating with friends," Mom replied, spreading her hands. "Their families rented a house in the mountains. An exclusive resort, you know." I nodded slowly, shifting my gaze to the dining table, which, contrary to all traditions, was not bursting with festive treats. There was only a store-bought ham, a few microwave snacks, and a bottle of cheap wine. My father was sitting in his armchair in the corner of the room, looking much older than the last time I remembered him. "We've had some setbacks," Mom finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at her father, and he nodded slightly, confirming her words. "The investments your father made didn't pay off," she added after a pause. "We had to take out loans to cover the losses. Christmas with the whole family just wasn't on the budget this year." I watched them pick at the food on their plates, these people who once seemed so powerful to me, controlling every aspect of my life, now looked small, defeated, and despite everything, something tightened in my chest. "Give me a minute," I said, pulling out my phone. I quickly scrolled through the delivery options, as restaurants operating on Christmas Day were not uncommon these days. 20 minutes and a few $100s later, I ordered a real feast: choice ribs, glazed ham, truffles, mashed potatoes with a thick creamy sauce, fried vegetables, and 3 different pies. When the courier delivered the food in an elegant package, the house was filled with the rich aromas of a real Christmas dinner. While I was eating, I noticed my mom looking at my designer watch, then glancing at my silk blouse. Her fingers trembled slightly as she put her fork down on her plate and exchanged a glance with Dad. We were thinking, since you're in such a good position right now, maybe you could help us. Temporarily. Until we get back on our feet. I studied their faces over the rim of my glass of wine. Part of me wanted to remind them of their own words to me when I begged for their help. Some people are destined for college, others are not. I wanted to ask them why they couldn't make the same sacrifices for me then that they were hoping for themselves now. But looking at their exhausted faces, at the empty Christmas tree without gifts, at the fragile uncertainty with which my mother was waiting for my answer, I couldn't do it. I could create an additional card for you in my account, I heard myself saying. With a monthly limit. Mom's eyes flashed with hope. Oh, honey, it's going to be $1,000 a month, I said firmly. No more. They nodded eagerly. It was more than they expected, although less than my weekly salary at the moment. A few days later, I released the card and sent it to my mom. They promised to be careful with expenses, comply with the limit, and for several months kept their word. In the statements, I saw neat amounts for utilities, grocery purchases, and basic needs. I barely noticed how the money was draining from the account, although sometimes, looking through the spending lists, I couldn't help but notice familiar names. The same grocery store where I once worked part-time in high school, trying to save money for college. The irony did not escape me. 2 years have passed, and I foolishly thought that everything was finally getting better, that this unspoken agreement, the established rhythm of monthly payments between us, had become something more than just financial support. Mom called regularly, discussed expenses, and over time our conversations began to resemble real conversations, or at least I wanted to believe it. We didn't just talk about utility bills and grocery shopping. Sometimes she even asked how I was doing, told me about family news, how my father was doing, and I allowed myself to believe that something like intimacy had finally appeared between us. Emily also started getting in touch, writing messages, congratulating me on my professional successes, although every time I talked about a promotion or a new project, her smile grew a little wider, her eyes narrowed a little, and her voice acquired the same condescending tone that I remembered from childhood. Senior project manager. That's sweet, she said one day, and I immediately remembered her earlier phrases, thrown casually back in school, when I was rejoicing at my victories, which meant nothing to her. Actually, I'm being promoted at Wilson & Company, she added in a light, almost casual tone. It's a small company, but very exclusive. Not everyone can handle such pressure. Her parents couldn't stop talking about Emily's new boyfriend, James. He comes from such a good family. Mom said enthusiastically during one of our calls. His parents own a real estate company in the city center. You should have seen how gallant he is, so well-mannered, a real gentleman. I listened to all this with a strange feeling, as if I were watching a play in which I did not have a role. Meanwhile, the expenses on my mother's card remained stable and familiar: groceries, bills, and sometimes modest dinners at cafes. Expected expenses. The usual stuff. I even began to rejoice that I could help, that perhaps this financial support heals old wounds, destroys long-standing resentments. And then that Instagram post appeared. I was scrolling through the feed when a familiar face caught my eye. Emily. She stood against the backdrop of a dazzling white beach, her hand in James's, and behind them, her parents shone against the turquoise ocean. Mom was smiling, dressed in a light designer sundress. Dad was standing next to Mr. Anderson, proudly putting his hand on his son's shoulder, and Mrs. Anderson was holding Emily's hand, as if she had already become part of their family. Above the photo was the caption. Paradise with my love. Engaged. Hawaii, blessed. My finger froze while scrolling. When did this happen? Why didn't anyone tell me? The next post hit my chest harder than I could have imagined. I am so grateful to Mom and Dad for making this magical engagement trip possible for all of us. They insisted on giving both families this dream vacation. The best parents in the world. Something clicked in my head. I opened the banking application. My fingers trembled as I logged into my personal account and looked at the latest card transactions. And here they are, the sums that instantly clouded my vision. 6 round-trip first-class tickets to Honolulu. Grand WA Resort, 3 suites with ocean view, 7 nights. Welcome dinner at Moroto. Spa treatments for couples. Private yacht tour. $3,500. They spent my money. They paid for a luxurious family vacation, an engagement party for Emily and her future relatives, without even considering it necessary to invite me, the person who financed all this. Anger surged through my blood, making my heart pound, and it took me 3 tries before I could press the call button. 1 call. 2. 3. Hi, Mom's voice came, calm and relaxed. Soft Hawaiian music was playing in the background, glasses were clinking, and waves were gently rolling on the sand. Suddenly I heard laughter, that light, carefree laugh of Emily's. I gritted my teeth. Where are you? My voice sounded smooth and professional, the same tone I used in meetings when dealing with difficult clients and hostile partners. Oh, dear, Mom's voice sounded uncertain, even scared. The music in the background gradually faded away, as if she was moving away from the holiday, from carefree laughter, from the clink of glasses filled with expensive champagne. Your father and I, we just decided to take a short break, relax. You know how it's been hard lately. I closed my eyes, pulling myself together, before looking back at the phone screen, where the numbers were displayed in the open banking application, which made my stomach clench. A short break? I exhaled in a restrained, professional voice, in the same even voice with which I usually negotiated with clients. At the Grand WA Resort, with Emily, James, and his whole family. That break cost $40,000, Mom. 40. Thousands. Of mine. Dollars. There was silence on the other side, then muffled voices, as if someone was trying to quickly discuss what to do next, how to get out. She knows, a voice whispered. It was barely audible, but I recognized it. I have to. It was his father, his low, worried tone betraying his nervousness. Emily, maybe you should. Mom's voice trembled, and then the phone rustled, passing into other hands. And then a new voice sounded, cold, steeped in irritation and contempt, a voice that I had known since childhood, a voice that had sounded next to me for so many years, and now seemed alien, as if it belonged to a stranger. Listen, Miss Supervisor, Emily began with a lazy sneer, emphasizing each word as if she were tasting it. You're not needed here. You're not even just a walking ATM anymore. No one needs you at all. We don't want you to ruin everything here with your little success story. No one is interested in hearing about your precious career while we celebrate my engagement. Her words hit me like a slap in the face, but I forced myself to keep my cool. I wonder if the ATM that just paid $20,000 for your party, another $20,000 for the flight and additional services, is that also of no interest to anyone? Or maybe you want to explain to me why it was my money that paid for your perfect family moment? Emily suddenly laughed hoarsely, a short, dry, repulsive laugh. Well, what else are you good for? She chuckled. Keep working at your fancy job, Carrie. We like spending your money. It's the only thing you've ever been useful for. It has always been so. Even when we were kids. At least now you're finally fulfilling your role. The line ended abruptly. I blinked at the screen, and then immediately pressed redial. 1 ring. 2. 3. Voicemail. I tried my father's number, and it was the same. I tried again. Now it's Emily. 1 ring and the call is dropped. And then, within a few minutes, one after another, notifications started popping up on my screen. The user has blocked you. First, the parents' profiles disappeared. Then Emily. From all platforms. From all the chats. And finally, A single message came before my number was also put on the blocked list. We are all tired of your attitude and jealousy. Just leave us alone. You've already ruined enough special moments for Emily. I stared at the screen, feeling something break inside, as something cold and hard crystallized in my chest. The anger has disappeared, the resentment has evaporated, there is only one thing left, a complete, absolute awareness of who they are. This time, my hands were no longer shaking when I opened the banking app again. This time I knew what to do. Every click was like breaking another link in the chain that connected me to their manipulations, their lies, their endless greed. A click. Cancellation of the hotel reservation, 3 suites with ocean view. A click. Cancellation of couple massage packages and sunset guided tours. A click. Cancellation of a private dinner on the beach. A click. Cancellation of first-class return tickets for 6 people. A click. Permanently deactivate mom's card. I put the phone next to me and just waited, imagining their faces when the hotel receptionist politely explained that their rooms had not been paid for. When they try to include some additional services in the room bill and are refused. When they arrive at the airport and find out that their return tickets have been cancelled. I could almost see their expressions at that moment. 3 hours later, my phone literally exploded, ring after ring, the screen flashed with names that I didn't want to see anymore. Mom. Dad. Emily. There were numbers that I didn't recognize, but I could easily guess who was trying to reach me from the Hawaii area codes. The Anderson family was undoubtedly wondering why their luxury vacation had suddenly turned into a nightmare. Messages started pouring in from all platforms, where they immediately unblocked me, because they realized that blocking someone who pays for your entertainment was not the smartest idea. Mom, Carrie, please call us immediately. This is an emergency. Dad, fix it right now. Young lady, you're a disgrace to the whole family. Emily, you better fix this, or I swear to God I'll never forgive you. Unknown number, this is James. My parents are furious. You need to restore these bookings. The tone of their messages changed as the hours passed, and apparently as their vacation crumbled before their eyes. Mom, honey, can we please talk about this? Dad, we will refund your money, just help us here. Emily, come on, Carrie, it's my engagement, don't be so petty. James, my parents are threatening to cancel the whole wedding. Do you even realize what you've done? I left them all unread, and then, systematically and without a single hesitation, I blocked every number and account, but not before taking screenshots. I had a strange feeling that I would need them again. A new notification arrived around midnight. Emily Mitchell has posted a new status. I can't believe that my own sister tried to ruin the happiest moment of my life. She was always jealous of my happiness, but this is a new fall. Canceling the whole family's vacation just out of anger? Who does that to their own sister's engagement party? Some people just can't see others happy. The comments started immediately. Oh my God, this is terrible. What kind of sister is doing this? I always knew there was something wrong with her. She's just jealous because you're getting married first. Your poor parents, they must be so embarrassed. I've been silent long enough. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I typed the answer. Let me tell you what really happened. My parents used my credit card for basic expenses, limited to $1,000 per month. Yesterday, I discovered that they spent over $40,000 of my money to pay for a luxury vacation to Hawaii in honor of Emily's engagement. They didn't ask me. They didn't tell me. They didn't invite me. When I called and asked why, Emily said that I was not a family, but just a walking ATM. Is this my mother's last message before she blocked me? We're all tired of you, so just leave us alone. So yes. I have canceled bookings that I did not authorize. I canceled their return flights, which I never agreed to pay for. I stopped financing a vacation that I wasn't allowed to attend. Here are screenshots of each message. Here are the credit card statements. Here's the truth about your poor Emily and her ruined engagement. Judge for yourself who is really toxic. As soon as I clicked publish, the situation immediately changed. The comments went differently. Oh my God, Emily, how could you use your sister's money by expelling her? It's cruel. Those poor Andersons. We got caught up in this family drama. Carrie, you did the right thing. Hold on. The consequences unfolded like a train wreck in slow motion. Scenes of chaos and shattered illusions flashed one after another, each event clinging to the previous one, dragging all participants into the vortex of the scandal, the echoes of which spread across social networks, mutual friends, and even work chats. Through acquaintances and random publications, I learned the full extent of the disaster that my family had caused in Hawaii. The parents had to borrow money from 3 different friends just to buy economy-class tickets home. After first class and luxury suites, they had to face the reality where champagne was not brought to the chair, and instead of hot towels, the flight attendant simply asked if they wanted soda. They were forced to check out of the Grand WEA resort in the middle of the day, when other hotel guests gathered by the pool, under the hot sun, and when it became clear that the paid rooms no longer existed, that they had no privileges, that everything was over. Emily threw a tantrum in the lobby, attracting unnecessary attention to herself. But the funniest thing was that someone captured her explosion on video, and a few hours later, this moment was already gaining thousands of views on TikTok. The Real breakup occurred at the moment, and the Andersons realized that they had to pay for their own accommodation. They were promised fully paid vacations, tickets, rooms, dinners at expensive restaurants, but instead they were trapped in someone else's lies, in a web of manipulation woven by my family. We trusted you. According to rumors, Mrs. Anderson yelled at my mother by the pool. Her voice carried throughout the terrace, attracting attention to herself. You said you took care of everything. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Emily, true to herself, made the situation even worse. Oh, stop being such greedy beggars, she exclaimed, waving away as if from an annoying fly. If you can't afford a few nights in Hawaii, maybe your son isn't good enough for our family after all. Silence hung in the air. James stood there in shocked silence, watching his fiancée destroy everything that remained between them. Finally, he took a deep breath, slowly shook his head, and said softly, "You're right about one thing. Someone is really not good enough for someone's family." He took the wedding ring off Emily's finger and left. The Andersons followed him. The engagement was terminated. Emily's dream wedding was cancelled before it even started. That's because they couldn't resist the temptation to steal from me one last time. A week after they returned home, there was a knock on the door. "Carrie, dear, open up." My mother's voice sounded muffled. It trembled, breaking through the sturdy wood of my apartment door. "We need to talk." "We know we screwed up," his father's voice joined in, more muffled, with a note of weariness. "Just give us a chance to explain ourselves." I was sitting on the couch, not moving, barely breathing. The TV was turned off, but the bluish light of the laptop screen flickered softly on my face, casting a faint glow into the room as they continued to plead outside the door. The pounding continued for 20 minutes before they finally gave up. Later, I heard them trying to persuade the manager of my building to let them inside, claiming it was an emergency. He called me to ask for permission, but I told him not to let them in. They never came back. That evening, Rachel came to me with a takeaway from the Golden Dragon, and we sat on my balcony, looking at the lights of the city that spread out in front of us in an endless glow. "Your post went to support groups for victims of toxic families," she said, picking at noodles with chopsticks. "Many people call you a hero. You resist abuse, set boundaries, and don't allow yourself to be used. People need it." I was silent, listening to the night noise of the street, to the distant honks of cars, to the voices of passers-by below. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn their love, about the money I'd given them, hoping it would make them see me as more than just a resource, more than just a tool, about the endless attempts to earn the approval they gave Emily so easily. I sighed as I watched the plane disappear into the night sky in the distance, taking someone to another life, to another future. You know what's funny? I said, cocking my head to the side, feeling a strange, slight emptiness inside me. Rachel looked at me questioningly. I smiled. For the first time in my life, I don't care what they think of me. I felt this realization slowly spreading through my body, pure, transparent, absolute liberation. I don't care if they're sorry. His voice sounded even, calm, with a kind of lightness that I had never experienced before. I don't care if they change. Rachel nodded silently, and I knew she understood. I looked at the lights of the city, felt the cool wind, listened to the sounds of a distant metropolis, which finally had a place for me. The most difficult thing in growing up is not learning to stand your ground. I took a sip of wine, smiling to myself. And learned how to leave on time. I've spent my whole life in Emily's shadow. Now it's time to step out into the light.